How can you spice up your biography, make it even more interesting? What sort of things could you add? There's a whole lot. But today I want to zoom into just one example of something you can add to really spice up your biography and make it that much fun reading, okay? This is going to be good. Stay tuned. So oftentimes people ask me, well, when I'm writing my biography or autobiography, of course, I'm going to write a whole lot about myself or that family member I'm writing for, but is there any way I can add something to give it some spark? To spice it up, make it even more interesting to potential readers out there. And here's one example. World events. Write about world events. This is particularly interesting to talk about now. We just witnessed this amazing solar eclipse, April 8th. My state here, Colorado, was not in the path of total darkness, but there was something to see here. I believe places in Texas and some other areas had the total darkness that we didn't have. That is one huge world event, right? Doesn't happen often, once every couple of decades, right? That's just one example. Other things. I can give you some examples from my life to date, things that I've witnessed. In addition to 3 solar eclipses, if there's such a word, I have also witnessed a lot. Some happened in my childhood, and I'll be honest, I wasn't old enough to be aware they were happening, but they have happened in my lifetime. So I would consider those still to be world events during my time. So in 100 years' time from now, I'm not likely to be here in 100 years' time. Obviously, it is much more than human life expectancy. But if somebody reads my life story, they will learn about the turn of the millennium, right? That was a huge deal. Millennium bug, our computer is going to crash, and all sorts of things that happened. People will hear about the fall of apartheid in South Africa, the election of Nelson Mandela, which was really a huge world event. People will hear about the election of the first Black US President, Barack Obama, happened in my lifetime. The fall of the Berlin Wall. That happened, I believe, in the 80s. I was really young at the time, but it was in my lifetime. Think of another example. It could even be people who were just really famous. Some celebrities, people like Michael Jackson, who were super duper famous at one time, the most famous human being on the planet. So things like that, very important world events. Of course, there are devastatingly sad things. The destruction, the devastation, the loss of life of 9/11. Things like that we'll never forget. Heartbreaking. So some of these world events are sad and devastating. The COVID crisis, the enormous loss of life, but they are notable. And I think by including world events, you can add substance to your story. You can make it clear that you are part of a larger world, like I like to think. And there's so many ways of putting that in. Even if you were not physically at that particular point where things were happening. For example, if I'm not mistaken, I believe Nelson Mandela marched out of prison in 1990, either 90 or 91, something like that. So you could say in 1990, I was finishing up my 3rd grade, for example. I remember I had a teacher I particularly liked in 3rd grade, and I felt really nervous about moving on to another class. But, we had some tests to take, or we had a field trip. And I remember we went to a zoo, and it was around that same time that I got home one particular day, and my dad mentioned that a certain man called Nelson Mandela was released from prison in South Africa, and the adults were talking about it and making a whole lot of noise about this. Just an example, right? I am fabricating the life history of somebody who clearly was not in South Africa, but whose parents knew about this huge event. So by crafting in and pulling in world events, you demonstrate how you are part of a larger world. It helps also to fix your life events in the larger frame of things going on in the world. I was coaching a Cameroonian princess to write her story, and she mentioned that in her infancy there was a blackout, solar eclipse, total darkness in the middle of the day. Turns out this was the 1947 solar eclipse that had parts of West Africa in total darkness. And I remember being very excited when I heard this because my dad was an infant and my late paternal grandmother used to tell us that story. So, in this way, my dad, an infant in Nigeria, and a little west, this Cameroonian princess, an infant in Cameroon, they were going through the same thing at the same time. And that's the beauty of personal stories, is we can be unique about it. We can say what was unique about our situation, but we can also see how we all are tied together as human beings on the same planet. That's it for this one. I'll see you in my next video.